Hello, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Downs Reading the Hope Chest. Today we're doing pages 196 through 203. Here we have a picture in the background of Cherocola. They're going to go on a picnic. Myrtle and Mr. Martin and Violet and Chloe, they're all going to go on a picnic, and they'll be drinking Cherocolas again. So this is an advertisement of what Cherocola would have looked like. Now, the author doesn't come out and say it directly, but I think that Cherocola, Chero to me sounds like cherry, and cola is like Coca-Cola. So I'm guessing it's kind of like a cherry cola flavored drink. And that's an inference I'm making because it never states it directly in the text. We kind of have to put that together ourselves. Beneath the Cherocola advertisement I have a picture of, this is about what a World War I soldier would have looked like. Chloe and Violet, they talk about their oldest brother Stephen for the first time in the book. And Stephen's kind of been lurking in the background. Yesterday for our comprehension activity, your job was to list as many details as you could about Stephen. That was your job on yesterday. And so I want you to think, what happened to Stephen? There's details that we know that he went to war and then he came back. But what really happened to him is, I think, an interesting thing for us to think about. A lot of students, when we do this in class, I have a lot of students that think that, oh, well, he got injured. You know, that he got shot or he got an arm blown off or something, but it doesn't really indicate that. And I have another video that I'll make where we talk just about Stephen and only about Stephen. But your goal while we're listening to this is to find out what happened to Stephen, and what does that kind of mean? It's just a very interesting thing that's kind of been throughout the whole book that we're gonna have to kind of synthesize together. So enjoy the Cherocolas and be listening for what happened to Stephen, and then my next video will have a little bit more information about Stephen. Chapter 16, Politics and Gunplay. In Violet's opinion, Sunday was an almost normal day. They packed a picnic lunch of sliced chicken and sandwiches, pickles, and Cherocola, and rode in the Hope Chest out to a quiet field beside a river where there was nobody around to worry about what any of them looked like. They didn't wear any roses either. Violet and Myrtle rode in the wooden truck bed on the back of the Hope Chest. It was a bumpy, dusty ride, but Violet didn't care, because she was wearing her horrible plaid dress and she was hoping to ruin it. She did, too. Chloe insisted that the first thing you had to learn about cars was how to take care of them, so she brought out a grease gun and an oil can, and showed Myrtle and Violet how to lubricate the spindle bolt and the steering ball socket and the universal joint, and about 100 other things Violet couldn't remember the names of. While the three of them climbed over and under the Hope Chest, getting gloriously dirty, Mr. Martin sat under a tree and read the Sunday paper. Then Chloe showed them how to start the thing. Violet doubted she'd ever be able to start a car by herself. It seemed to require two people, one to turn the crank at the front, which was tricky because if the car backfired, the crank could break your arm, said Chloe, and one to work the throttle and the spark, two levers on the steering wheel. And you really had to listen, said Chloe. Violet didn't know what Chloe was really listening for, because when the thing started, it sounded like a barrel of tin cans being eaten by a steam engine. To drive the car, you had to use your feet to work the reverse pedal, and the high and low speed clutch, and your hand to work the throttle. It was too much to think about all at once. And Violet was glad they had this whole big open field, so she didn't have to worry too much about steering. Instead, she concentrated on using the foot pedals and hand levers to keep the car running as it jolted and jumped over the hummocky field. When it was Myrtle's turn to drive, Violet went to sit with Mr. Martin and look at the newspaper. Mr. Martin had prudently moved a little farther into the trees, out of the way of the Hope Chest. Is this whole Sunday paper about nothing but baseball? Violet asked, flipping through the pages. Pretty much. Isn't it grand? Why is there nothing in here about what's going on with the amendment? Violet asked. They're probably trying to pretend it isn't happening, said Mr. Martin. Good heavens, I can't believe the Yankees lost to the Tigers. They should have never taken on Babe Ruth. Violet noticed a story at the top of the page. They caught him! Mr. Martin started. Caught who? He said warily. Veteran hobo at 12 is in the hands of police, Violet read out loud. Hobie, the fellow who helped us get to Washington. Poor lad, said Mr. Martin, but he'll be off on his travels again soon, I'm sure. Violet read the article. The reporter seemed very amused by the whole story and recounted that Hobo claimed he'd be off again in no time. Looks like the White Sox are getting stomped, Mr. Martin observed. They deserve it after last year. Violet looked up at Myrtle and Chloe bumping over the field in the hope chest. Myrtle, who was shorter than Violet, seemed to be having considerable difficulty seeing over the hood while working both the hand and foot controls, and then Mr. Martin reading baseball scores. They all had something hanging over them, Violet thought. Myrtle had nowhere to go but except back to the Girls' Training Institute. Poor Mr. Martin seemed to have nowhere to go but jail. And what about Chloe? Violet wasn't sure if Chloe saw anything after the Tennessee vote at all. Later, she and Myrtle took off their shoes and stockings and waded in the creek at the bottom of the field. The water was pleasantly cool on their feet, and little minnows came up and nibbled on their legs as they stood in the current. Violet told Myrtle about Hobie being caught and sent home to his stepmother. "He'll take off again," said Myrtle. "Probably already has." "Do you ever think about what you're going to do with the rest of your life, Myrtle?" said Violet. "Yeah," said Myrtle. "Well, what?" said Violet. "I don't know, but it's going to be important," said Myrtle. They walked farther downstream and tried to catch some frogs. When Violet finally did catch one, she held it for a moment, enjoying the cool feel of its soft, clammy skin in her hands, and then it pushed off with its mighty hind legs and plopped into the water. Violet asked Myrtle if it wasn't time they headed back, and Myrtle said it wasn't, so they walked even farther downstream and talked about the things they'd seen and done and heard in Nashville. Violet wanted to know more about where Myrtle and Mr. Martin were staying. Bless me. But Myrtle was curiously reluctant to talk about it. "It's called Dead Horse Alley," said Myrtle. "We're staying with a lady in her house." "Is it like the alleys in Washington?" said Violet, remembering the tumble-down shacks and heaps of trash and rats. "Sort of different," said Myrtle with a shrug. "Look, there's some kind of animal hole over there." So they went over to the bank and looked at a burrow under the roots of a willow tree and tried to decide what might live there. Myrtle was fun to explore with, Violet thought, a lot more fun than the Antis. But the world seemed to have been set up so that Myrtle and Violet would always be on different sides of an invisible line. By Monday, August 16th, nobody could tell which side anybody was on anymore. Nobody knew when the House was going to vote. The Antis and the Suffs were both polling the legislators every few hours, and it seemed like every few hours the list of who was an Anti and who was a Suff had changed. Chloe told Violet at their noon meeting that she didn't think the polls were good at all anymore. They met at the lunchroom at Union Station, because Violet was supposed to have been spending the morning watching the train station telegraph offices for the Antis. She hadn't really been doing this, of course, but she had gone down to the train station for verisimilitude. Chloe had been assigned to spend some more time with Harry T. Byrne, but he had gone up to the Capitol. The Suff strategy required that only Tennessee women lobbied legislators at the Capitol. Northerners were known to irritate Southerners, and the Suffs didn't want the Tennessee legislators to be irritated. "I don't think we have a chance with Byrne anyway," said Chloe. "He's just enjoying the attention. He's so young." Violet had heard that Byrne was 24, which was a year older than Chloe. "He's still wearing a red rose." "Let's go up to the Capitol," said Chloe when they finished their chicken salad sandwiches. "But we're not supposed to," said Violet. "Oh, we won't lobby anybody," said Chloe. "I just want to see what's going on. Besides, you've never seen inside it, have you? It's nice." Chloe drove the hope chest carefully along Broadway and then up 6th Avenue, braking to let people pass. The city seemed to be getting more crowded every minute. Not everyone had yellow or red symbols to show that they were Suffs or Antis. There were a lot of tourists who had just come to watch the battle. Chloe stopped to let a woman pushing a high-backed wicker wheelchair across the street. In the wheelchair was a young man whose legs ended at the knee, who Violet guessed from his age might have been a soldier. The woman looked like she might be his mother. "I wish you hadn't left Stephen alone like that," Chloe said. "You wish I hadn't?" Violet was stung by the unfairness of this. "I didn't leave him alone. I left him with Mother and Father." "Yes, but being with Mother and Father can be a bit like being alone, you know." "Yes, I do know, as a matter of fact," Violet said, folding her arms. "Violet, you don't think I abandoned you, do you? Father threw me out." "No, he didn't," Violet argued. "He told you never to darken his door again when you bought the hope chest, but you'd already moved out by then." Yes, Chloe said. Yes, Chloe stopped again. A yellow dog was wandering across the road ahead of them. "I had to leave, Violet." "So did I," said Violet. "Anyway, it's not like Stephen really notices who's around him." "I think he does," said Chloe. Then Violet remembered that Chloe had studied to be a nurse since leaving home. "Do people with shell shock ever get better?" "Some do," said Chloe. "It takes time. And it may be that they all do. It's a fairly new disease. We don't know much about it." "Dang!" The engine gave a loud pow and stopped running. "Now we're stalled. Violet, could you crank?" Violet got out, went to the front of the car, and inserted the metal crank that's turned the starter. She cranked until the car coughed, spat smoke, and started. Then she got back into the passenger seat next to Chloe. They chugged on. So, what causes it then? Violet said. Well, some doctors believe it's caused by low air pressure in areas where lots of shells have been fired. Not by, Violet searched for a word, cowardice, said Chloe bluntly. No, why should it be? After all, shell shock is a new disease, and cowardice is as old as humanity. Violet thought about this. It made sense. That was one of the nice things about Chloe. She was always so sensible. Then Chloe ruined it by saying, Violet, even if Stephen was frightened, why shouldn't he be, surrounded by bombs and bullets and enemy soldiers? Violet made no reply. She liked the low air pressure explanation better. So again, the author here never really comes out and says anything directly. We kind of have to piece some information together. So what happened to Stephen in the war? Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.